In this video, we're going to go over the pre-flight checklist for a large-size electric helicopter. Now first off, once again warning, electric helicopters are not toys, and you need to seek out the advice and experience and help of an experienced flight instructor for large-size electric helicopters. Additionally, you should have a good flying field to visit, as well as your AMA, Academy of Model Aeronautics insurance. The following checklist is a recommendation of processes that are good for a large-size electric helicopter. This checklist has been compiled from a number of professional pilots and can be used as a general guide for your electric helicopter. Please keep in mind you should check the manufacturer recommendations for your particular helicopter, which would be located in the instruction manual for the aircraft. Item 1. First off, you're going to get to the flying field and you're going to want to get your electric helicopter out and you're going to want to get the canopy off so you can inspect the parts carefully. You're going to want to first off check all the linkages of the aircraft to make sure they're tight and secure. So all these linkages are called ball links, and they should be flexible and not stiff. At the same time, they cannot be so loose as to fall off. One of the rules that people have used over the years is that if you can grab the ball link and actually pull the helicopter over, it's a pretty good idea that it's plenty tight. If you actually pull the ball link and it just pops off like this, that ball link plastic has worn out and needs to be replaced. I'm going to go ahead and pop this back on. So we're checking all the servos to make sure the servos are screwed in, the parts are attached. There's nothing obviously wrong with the helicopter. The gyro's on. And we also are going to check the other side of the helicopter. We're going to look at the linkages. We're also going to look at the linkages in the head. Now once again, if you have a flybarless head helicopter, you have about a third less parts up here on the top, which makes your inspection process a lot easier. While you're at it, you might want to check your blade tightness to make sure the blades are not too loose and not too tight. Now some people see that the helicopter blades move and they panic. The helicopter is designed to have blades that are not hinged tightly. This allows the blade to lead or lag as it turns. You can't see it in flight, but there'll be little movements of this helicopter blade backwards and forwards as it spins. So you don't want it so tight that you can't move it freely. Another trick that sometimes people use is they'll hold the helicopter sideways. If they can hold it sideways without the blades dropping, it's tight. However, if you bounce the helicopter like this and you see the blades sag down, then you know that they're sufficiently loose to allow them to move during flight. Now some folks like to tighten the blades really tight or really loose because they're experimenting with aerobatics. But as a general benchmark, you don't want to have them too tight or too loose. Now while we're on the subject of rotor blades, we're going to go along the surface of the rotor blade to check for any damage. Now these are carbon fiber rotor blades, and so they're tougher, but if they've been hit by something, they may be damaged. You don't want the rotor blade coming off in the air. A rotor blade coming off in the air is one of the most dangerous things that can happen. It's a catastrophic failure of the helicopter. You're going to lose the aircraft, and hopefully you don't hurt anyone. So it's really important as part of your pre-flight inspection to make sure these blades are in great shape. So we're checking the blades on the main rotor. I'm also going to flip the helicopter around and check the blades on the tail. Uh-oh, look at this helicopter. These tail rotor blades have been dinged. Now sometimes you might have a little ding on the leading edge where it maybe knocked off a piece of paint, or on a tail rotor, some helicopters you'll get low with the tail and you might clip the ground a little bit and you wear a little bit off. So you got to be careful. You have to be careful about that. Because you ding the tip a little bit doesn't mean the blade's lost, but you got to look at the blade to make sure it's not coming apart. This blade actually is starting to separate due to the damage here. These tail rotor blades are going to have to be removed and replaced. They cannot be repaired. The dynamic forces of the rotor blade are so high that someone simply trying to use white Elmer's glue or super glue to glue the blades back together is not necessarily going to work. Once again, you cannot afford to have a tail rotor blade or a main rotor blade come off, even part of it come off in flight. So now that we're going to change our tail rotor blades, we're going to go ahead and do that before we fly, but let's continue the checklist to see what other issues we have. One of the next things we need to do is make sure the aircraft is lubricated. Now, an electric helicopter, There's no natural lubrication, whereas in a nitro helicopter, the engine actually spews a bit of oil out, which tends to go everywhere, which lubricates the helicopter whether you want to or not. In the case of electric, there's no natural source of this, so along the main shaft sometimes you'll need to put a little oil on it to make sure that as the swash plate goes up and down, it'll have a nice smooth surface to work with. The same goes on the tail rotor. On the tail rotor here, we're going to need to add a little bit of oil along the shaft to make sure that we have good smooth motion. The next thing we need to make sure we do, of course, is have a fresh battery for the helicopter. If you don't know if the battery is charged or not, you're taking a risk by flying it. Now generally the helicopter won't just cut out and fall out of the air. You'll actually hear the main rotors go slower, and that's a warning that your battery voltage is dropping off. If the battery voltage drops off too low on a lithium battery, you're going to damage the battery and maybe cause a fire. Once again, treat the helicopter and the batteries with care and with respect, because the helicopter can damage or hurt someone very badly, and these lithium batteries can cause fires. I have personally had a fire in a portable trailer at one point. We put it out with a fire extinguisher, but the battery started burning on its own, and we never quite understood why that happened. But it can happen. These batteries have burned down houses, burned down cars. You just have to be careful with it. You never charge a lithium battery unattended. You always make sure that you're in the same room with it and you keep an eye on it. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and turn on our radio. I'm going to turn on my radio. It's giving me warnings to make sure the switches are in the correct position, and that's a feature on this radio. The other thing I've done with my radio is that I've got a number of different switches that do different things, but on my initial startup of the aircraft, the initial configuration, I've set it so all my switches are forward. Every last switch will be forward for me to start the aircraft. Now as I progress in the flight or I get things rolling, I might flip certain switches forward, but just the way I do it, some people might go the other way. But it's a good idea to be consistent so you can check that all your switches are maybe down, or in my case, I've got them all forward, and I know just by looking and feeling that we're ready to go. Now also, while we're getting the radio set up, we want to make sure that we have the correct model for the correct aircraft dialed into the radio. Most of the radios have the ability to control more than one aircraft. This radio here can control 30 different models. So the goal is to make sure we adjust the onboard computer to know which aircraft it's flying. Now the Spectrum radio that I'm using here has an automatic match capability, so it won't allow me to use the wrong model. So understand that lots of accidents have occurred in helicopters and planes over the years because people had the radio set up for one type of aircraft, yet they were flying a different aircraft, and the controls were all wrong for the aircraft. And as they take off, something's wrong, they don't know what's happening, it goes out of control and crashes, and you lose the helicopter or airplane. Once again, you want to have your model set correctly, and with the Spectrum radio, it does this for me automatically. So I got all my switches forward. I got my throttle hold, which is over here, forward. So my throttle hold is off. My idle up switch, which is my flight setting switch, is on normal. Most radios and helicopter pilots will have a normal setting, an N1 or N2 setting. These are typically different setups for the aircraft at different stages. So typically you'll start the aircraft up at N, but then as you're ready to do aerobatics or more advanced things, you can turn the switch to N1 or N2 and adjust the power to the engine. Maybe it puts out more power and the rotors turn faster, which allows your aerobatics to be much nicer, much more crisp. That's typically a feature for a more experienced helicopter pilot. At the beginning when you're learning how to fly, you'll fly an N, but it depends upon the setup of your radio and your aircraft. Once again, your flight instructor that you've sought out that's helping you has helped you set up the radio and help you set up the aircraft. Once again, this is where personal preference comes in. So I've gone through the fact that my gyro switch is forward, my throttle control is all the way back. If I'm using a timer to tell me how much fuel is in the helicopter or how much electric power is left in the battery, say if I know that the battery will go dead after 8 minutes, so I set the timer for 7 minutes, so I know that the alarm goes off and it tells me I have 1 minute of battery power left or maybe 1 minute of fuel left. That's a good idea to have a timer if you're not comfortable knowing when the helicopter is ready to come down. So all switches are forward.